Throwaway account because some friends know my main and I honestly don't have the energy to deal with that right now. I'm A34M, married to my wife 33F for a little over 7 years. Together for 12. No kids yet, or at least that's what I thought was the plan until recently. I'm posting here because my life basically detonated over the last few weeks, and I need outside perspective before I lose what's left of my sanity. Up until a couple of months ago, I would have described our marriage as fine, not perfect, not fairy tale, but stable. We both work, split bills, had routines. Netflix nights, grocery runs on Sundays, the usual adult stuff. Looking back now, I realize fine was probably just me being comfortable and ignoring red flags because it was easier. The first signs something was off were small and honestly easy to dismiss. She started guarding her phone like it contained state secrets. New password. Screen always face down. If I walked into a room while she was texting, she'd suddenly get quiet or lock it and ask me something random like, "Did you take the trash out?" I joked about it at first. She snapped back that I was being paranoid and controlling. That should have been my first real wake-up call. Around the same time, her schedule started doing weird gymnastics. Late work meetings that somehow only happened on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sudden gym sessions at 9 p.m. even though she used to complain non-stop about being too tired to work out. She also started caring a lot more about her appearance out of nowhere. New underwear, new perfume, shaving habits that definitely weren't for me. When I made a comment like, "Wow, you're putting in effort," she rolled her eyes and said, "God, I'm allowed to feel good about myself without it being about you." That sentence stuck with me in a bad way. I tried to talk to her about feeling disconnected, calmly, adult-like, told her I felt like she was pulling away. She actually laughed and said I was being dramatic and insecure. Then she flipped it on me, accused me of not paying enough attention to her, of being boring, predictable, emotionally flat. That one hurt more than I expected. I went to bed that night feeling like I'd somehow failed a test I didn't know I was taking. Still, I didn't think she was cheating. I thought maybe midlife-ish crisis, maybe resentment building up, maybe I'd gotten complacent. I started trying harder, cooking more, suggesting date nights, complimenting her. She accepted all of it like it was owed to her with zero warmth in return. If anything, she seemed annoyed by my efforts, like I was embarrassing her by trying. The atmosphere in the house got tense fast. Short answers. Snapping over stupid things. One night she outright told me, "You're suffocating me." I remember sitting there thinking, how did we get here so quickly? I had no idea that I was already standing on the edge of the real drop. The actual discovery wasn't some dramatic movie moment. No lipstick on a collar, no walking in on them in bed. It was stupidly mundane, which almost makes it worse. She left her laptop open on the kitchen table one morning while she rushed to shower. That never happened, ever. Her laptop was usually locked down tighter than her phone. I wasn't snooping at first. I swear that. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen while I was making coffee. Just a preview. A Slack-style message bubble with a name I didn't recognize and the words, "Last night was insane. Can't stop thinking about you." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to throw up right there on the tile. I stood there frozen for a good 10 seconds, just staring at the screen like it might change if I didn't move. Then survival mode kicked in. My hands were shaking, but I clicked it. No password prompt, nothing. Just open. Like she didn't even consider the possibility I'd see it. What I found felt like being punched repeatedly without time to breathe between hits. Weeks of messages. Flirting at first, then explicit stuff. Complaints about me. Laughing at my predictable routines. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Plans to meet up. Photos. I won't go into detail, but yeah, there was zero ambiguity. This wasn't emotional cheating. This was full-on, no denial, scorched earth cheating. The worst part. The casualness of it. The way she talked about me like I was a mild inconvenience instead of her husband. like I was an obstacle she had to manage, not a person with feelings. I didn't even finish reading before she came back into the kitchen in a towel, humming like everything was normal. I must have looked insane because she immediately asked, "What's wrong with you?" I just turned the laptop toward her, the color drained from her face. Then, almost instantly, it hardened. No tears, no panic, just annoyance. That's when I knew, deep down, that this wasn't a mistake to her. This was something she felt entitled to. I asked her one question, just one. How long? My voice didn't even sound like mine. She crossed her arms, rolled her eyes, and said, "It's not what you think," which, honestly, should be illegal to say in situations like this. I told her I read the messages. She shrugged and said I invaded her privacy. That's where the conversation started, apparently from my wrongdoing. She tried to downplay it immediately. Said it was just flirting at first, then just talking. Then, when I pointed out the very obvious proof that it was physical, she snapped and said, "Okay, fine, but it didn't mean anything." The speed at which the story changed gave me whiplash. I asked who he was. She hesitated, then said it was a guy from work, but not really from work. More like work adjacent. When I pressed, she accused me of interrogating her and said I was acting crazy. At one point she literally said, "This is why I didn't feel safe telling you anything." That sentence still makes my blood boil. Then came the blame-shifting Olympics. She said she felt neglected, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that I didn't excite her anymore, that she'd been unhappy for years. News to me. According to her, the affair wasn't the problem, it was a symptom of me. I remember asking, "So you never thought to talk to me or leave?" She scoffed and said, "And blow up my life because you can't handle growth." Like cheating was some kind of personal development seminar. At no point did she actually apologize. Not once. She just kept insisting I was overreacting, that people cheat all the time, and that I needed to calm down and think rationally. Meanwhile, my entire understanding of my marriage was collapsing in real time. Things escalated fast after that. Like, blink and you miss it fast. I asked if it was still going on. She said no. Then 5 minutes later, when I asked why he texted her that morning, she said, "Well, technically, yes, but we're just talking now." When I pointed out that was still lying, she snapped, "God, you're impossible." At some point she tried to grab the laptop out of my hands. I instinctively pulled it back, and she immediately yelled, "Don't touch me like that." I haven't touched her, not even close. But suddenly I was the aggressor in her version of events. That was a theme I'd see again and again. Then, out of nowhere, she burst into tears, full-on sobbing, saying she felt attacked and judged, saying I was making her the villain instead of trying to understand her feelings. I stood there completely numb, watching her cry for herself while I felt like I was disappearing. The wildest part. 10 minutes later, the tears were gone, like someone flipped a switch. She looked at me and said, very calmly, "I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not sorry for being happy." That sentence hit harder than any yelling could have. I asked if she loved him. She laughed, not nervously amused. "Love is a strong word," she said, "but at least he listens to me." That was the moment anger finally broke through the shock. I raised my voice. I asked her how long she planned to humiliate me. She told me I was being dramatic and that if I didn't calm down, she'd leave for the night, and she did. Grabbed her bag, put on makeup like she was going out for drinks, and walked out while I was still standing there in yesterday's clothes, trying to process how my wife had turned into someone I didn't recognize in a single morning. The second she walked out, everything hit at once. I didn't cry right away. I paced, I checked the door. I sat down. I stood up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. At some point I realized I was laughing, which scared me more than the anger. It was that hollow, disconnected laugh you do when reality feels fake. Then the practical stuff started crashing in: bills, lease, shared accounts, our families. The dog sleeping in the corner, completely unaware that his entire routine was about to get nuked. I checked our bank account, nothing missing, but suddenly every transaction felt suspicious. I hated that this was happening to my brain. I hated that she'd turned me into this paranoid version of myself in under an hour. She didn't come home that night. She texted around midnight, "I'm staying with a friend. We both need space. Don't blow up my phone." No explanation of which friend. No apology. Just a boundary, she said after bulldozing mine. I didn't reply. Mostly because I didn't trust myself not to say something I couldn't take back. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed those messages. The jokes, the intimacy, her words about me. I kept thinking about how normal she'd been the night before, asking what I wanted for dinner, complaining about work, kissing me on the cheek like muscle memory. That part messed me up the most. The ease of the deception. By morning, the shock had worn off enough to leave behind something colder and heavier. Not just sadness, grief. For a marriage I thought I had, for a person I thought I knew, for the version of myself that trusted without question. I called in sick to work and spent the day doing nothing and everything at the same time, cleaning the kitchen at 10 a.m., deleting photos at noon, then restoring them because I wasn't ready. I realized I wasn't just reacting to an affair. I was starting to understand that the woman who left last night might not actually come back in any meaningful way. She came back the next evening like nothing had happened. No hesitation, no shame. Just walked in, dropped her keys, and asked if I'd fed the dog. I don't know what expression I had on my face, but she sighed and said, "Are we really still doing this?" That set me off. I asked where she'd been. She said, "I told you, a friend." I asked which one. She said, "Why does it matter?" I told her it mattered because I was her husband and she'd just been caught cheating. She laughed again, that same dismissive little laugh, and said, "You don't own my whereabouts." I asked her, very clearly, if she'd slept with him the night before. She said no. I asked her to look me in the eye and say it. She refused and said I was being creepy. When I pointed out that refusal kind of answered the question, she snapped and said, "Fine, yes, but that doesn't change anything," like it was a technical detail, not a knife twist. She then launched into this bizarre monologue about how she'd outgrown me, how I represented a version of her life that felt small, how the affair made her feel alive. She used that word multiple times, alive. Meanwhile, I felt like I was suffocating in my own living room. I asked if she wanted to stay married. She said, "I don't know," in the most annoyed tone possible, like I'd asked her what she wanted for dinner. Then she added, "But I'm not going to be monogamous just to make you feel secure." That was news to me. Apparently, we were rewriting the rules retroactively, when I said that wasn't what I signed up for. She accused me of being closed-minded and said, "Plenty of adults make non-traditional arrangements," which might be true. But it's not exactly something you spring on someone after lying to them for months. That night, I slept on the couch. Not because she asked me to, but because sharing a bed with her suddenly felt impossible. The next few days were chaos in slow motion. We existed in the same house like hostile roommates. She was suddenly very cheerful around her phone again, smiling at messages she'd tilt away from me. When I asked if she was still talking to him, she said, "Why are you obsessed with this?" Then, not even an hour later, I caught her whispering in the bathroom. When I knocked, she snapped, "Can I have 5 minutes without being monitored?" I started writing things down. Not in a creepy way, but because every conversation felt like gaslighting whiplash. She'd deny saying something, then contradict herself later. One minute she'd say she wanted space to figure herself out. The next she'd say she never said she wanted a break from the marriage. At one point she told me, "You're remembering things wrong because you're emotional." That one messed with my head more than I'd like to admit. Sudden event number I didn't expect. Her sister called me. Apparently my wife had told her some version of events where I was emotionally abusive and controlling, and she wanted to check in. I calmly told her what actually happened. There was a long pause on the other end. Then her sister said, "That's not what she said at all." That was both validating and terrifying. That night, my wife found out I'd talked to her sister. She exploded, accused me of turning people against her, said I was trying to ruin her reputation. I asked how telling the truth equaled manipulation. She said, "Your truth isn't the truth." I realized then she wasn't just lying. To me, she was building a whole alternate narrative, where she was the victim and I was the obstacle. I stopped trying to reason with her after that. Not because I didn't care, but because it felt like arguing with someone who'd already decided the outcome and was just improvising excuses to get there. Emotionally, I was a mess. Every time she left the room, I felt like my heart was a balloon being squeezed. Every text notification made me jump. I started questioning everything about our marriage, what was real, what wasn't, whether any of her affection had ever been genuine. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus at work. I became that cliché, staring blankly at the ceiling, replaying every little memory and second-guessing it like I was some detective in a bad crime drama. One night, she had one of her sudden "we need to talk" moments. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd acknowledge what she'd done. She didn't. Instead, she sat on the edge of the couch, crossed her legs, and launched into a lecture about how I was too needy and sensitive, that I needed to learn how to handle adult relationships, and that maybe our marriage was holding her back from growing into herself. She said all of this with a condescending smile, like she was reviewing my flaws in a grading rubric. I snapped. I told her that wasn't acceptable, that she'd broken my trust, and that gaslighting me was not okay. She leaned back, almost bored, and said, "You think I care if you trust me? Trust is an illusion. People lie. Deal with it." I couldn't even respond. I just felt hollow and, for the first time, genuinely scared of how little she seemed to care about the person she used to love or claim to love. That night, I cried for the first time in months. Big, uncontrollable, silent crying in the shower. I felt like I was mourning someone who was still technically alive in the house but completely gone in every way that mattered. The sudden events kept coming. A week later, I came home early from work to grab something I'd forgotten. I swear I wasn't planning to confront her, just needed a charger. I walked into the bedroom and found a receipt shoved under the pillow, a hotel she claimed she had used for work out-of-town meetings. The amount was absurdly high, the location suspicious, and the dates lined up exactly with the nights she said she was with a friend when I asked her about it. She laughed like I'd said something ridiculous. "Oh, that. You're really obsessing over nothing." I told her I wasn't stupid, and she rolled her eyes, saying, "You know, you can't control everything. You're pathetic." That word hit me like a punch in the gut. Not because of her anger, but because she said it like it was a fact. I felt trapped. Part of me wanted to leave her on the spot, but the house, the routines, the sheer exhaustion of thinking about packing, calling lawyers, splitting assets, it all weighed me down. And she knew it. She thrived on that. Every smirk, every sarcastic comment, every dismissive laugh was like salt on an open wound. That night, I barely slept again. Every creak of the floor, every notification, every shadow on the wall felt like a potential disaster. I realized I was living in a constant state of emotional ambush. And the worst part? She did all of this with an almost casual ease, like it was her version of normal. About 10 days after the discovery, I decided I couldn't keep spiraling silently. I needed clarity, even if it hurt. So I sat her down at the kitchen table, laid out all the evidence, and said, "We need to figure out if we're even in the same marriage anymore. Tell me the truth, everything. No lies, no excuses." She stared at me for a long moment, then let out this exaggerated sigh, like I'd just asked her to do algebra blindfolded. Then she said, "I don't know why you're making such a big deal. It's over now, so what's the point?" I asked if it was really over or just the night before. She said it didn't matter. When I pressed, she finally admitted that she'd slept with him multiple times, and yes, it had been ongoing for months. She said it casually, like she was telling me about the weather. She even threw in a line about how he wasn't a bad guy and that she didn't think he'd hurt anyone. She clearly didn't understand that I was the one being hurt. I tried to respond calmly, but the betrayal had pushed me past any semblance of civility. I asked her point blank if she wanted to stay married. She said, "Maybe. I don't know. I need time." Time. The word hung in the air like a threat. She didn't apologize. She didn't look ashamed. She just acted like this was a small inconvenience in her otherwise perfectly happy life. At that moment, I realized the woman I married, the woman I trusted, the woman I thought loved me was gone. And no amount of talking was going to bring her back. After that conversation, I stopped trying to reason with her. Every interaction felt like walking on landmines while she held the detonator. She started coming and going at odd hours, leaving me to stare at walls, wondering what version of my life she was living without me. I caught glimpses, flirtatious texts, hushed calls, and the way she'd casually leave her phone on the counter again, fully aware that I'd see it if I wanted to. It was taunting, like she thrived on the chaos she'd created. One night, I made the decision to sleep in the guest room. The next morning, I started packing a small bag, just essentials. I wasn't leaving yet, but I needed a boundary. When she saw me, she rolled her eyes and said, "Are you seriously acting like this?" I didn't respond. I didn't even argue. For the first time, I felt a little power over my own life. That week, every day brought some sudden curveball. She'd switch her story about who she'd been with or what she'd done, or claim I was misremembering something that was literally on text messages. I learned to document everything. Notes on my phone, screenshots, dates, times, conversations. Because if this was going to get ugly, I needed to protect myself. Emotionally, I was oscillating between rage and numbness. I couldn't cry anymore. I'd burned that outlet out weeks ago. Now I was left with a heavy, grinding sadness and the slow realization that her bitchy, lying self wasn't a temporary phase. This was who she was now. And I had to figure out if I was strong enough to survive it. About 2 weeks in, I made a choice. I realized that staying in the house while she continued her pattern of lies and betrayal was poisoning me. I didn't want to fight constantly, didn't want to beg for scraps of honesty, and certainly didn't want to keep being gaslit. So I told her, calmly for the first time in weeks, that I needed space. I was moving out for now. At least until we could figure out if there was any point in trying to salvage this. Her reaction was predictably dramatic. "So that's it. You're leaving me? After everything?" She acted like I was abandoning her when in reality I was just refusing to let her destroy me any further. She cried, she yelled, she insulted me, calling me weak, selfish, incapable of understanding the complexities of adult relationships. I just packed my bag and didn't respond. Each word she spat felt like proof that she had no remorse, no guilt, no real intention to fix what she'd broken. Leaving the house was surreal. Every familiar corner, every memory we'd made felt tainted. I realized that the life I thought I had, my marriage, my partnership, was gone, replaced by a version that only existed in her head. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I had to protect myself before we could exist again. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I had a sliver of control. The betrayal still stung, but I could breathe again. Small steps, I told myself. Just survive the day, then the next. And maybe, eventually, find out who I was without her rewriting my reality. The following weeks were a blur of moving between friends' couches, reestablishing routines, and therapy sessions. I couldn't stop thinking about her, not because I missed her, but because my brain kept trying to reconcile two versions of reality. The woman I loved and the woman who had lied to me with such ease. Every memory of affection was now tinged with doubt. Every laugh haunted by the thought that it had been performative, eventually. I accepted that I couldn't fix her, couldn't force her to care, and certainly couldn't stay in a marriage where my trust was weaponized against me. I realized my anger was like fire. It burned, it hurt, but it also illuminated. It showed me where the real damage was, and more importantly, where I needed to draw the line. I reached a decision: I would file for separation. No messy arguments, no vindictive drama. Just a clean break, documenting everything to ensure my life didn't get hijacked by her version of events. It wasn't the happy ending I wanted, but it was the sane one. I had to reclaim my life before it was defined entirely by her lies and selfishness. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I ignored. I can see the small betrayals that escalated into this avalanche. And I finally understand. Trust is sacred, and when it's weaponized, The person who betrays it is not just hurting the relationship, they're hurting the very foundation of who you believed yourself to be with them. Now, a few months later, I'm in a different place. I've rebuilt routines, reconnected with friends I'd neglected, and started therapy to untangle the emotional mess. The anger is still there, but it's quieter, more controlled. The grief is still there too, but it no longer defines my every thought. I've learned that betrayal doesn't just hurt in the moment, it reshapes how you see yourself, your choices, and your capacity to trust. If there's one piece of advice I'd offer anyone in a similar situation, it's this: document everything, protect yourself, and never accept someone else's narrative as your reality. Cheating isn't just about physical acts. It's about the lies, the dismissiveness, and the lack of accountability. And you deserve better than someone who can betray your trust without remorse. I still feel sad sometimes. I still think about the life I thought I had. But I also feel a quiet strength that I didn't know existed before. And maybe that's the only silver lining, that even after someone destroys your world, you can rebuild it, stronger and wiser than before. This is my story. Thanks for reading.